already. So let's get started. Good afternoon, colleagues, and also good morning for those who are based in European time zone. A very welcome to everyone who attend today's webinar session, ADB TBI Forum for Tech Inclusive Education. This event is aimed to be a presentation and also a special meeting comprising relevant staff from ADB and Tony Blair Institute, TBI, to share insights on education and tech-related work. This builds on earlier conversations we had between the two organizations around effective policies on integrating technology in education. In particular, TBI has developed a minimum viable education system, MVES, drawn on research into best educational practice and input from a range of stakeholders. So the MVES framework is organized across a range of dimensions that play a role in creating a positive learning environment. So we'll hear about this concept. The way we organize this session is to start with an opening remark from both organizations and followed by a main presentation on the minimum viable education system, MVES. And then we will invite a few discussants from both ADB and the TBI side to share insights on education and tech projects, exchange knowledge and perhaps and perspectives as well. So as a matter of, we will then open up the Q&A for other participants to take questions and followed by a closing remark for the next steps and actions. So now, without further ado, let me first introduce Burjess Panth for the welcome remarks. For colleagues in TBI and other organizations who might not have met Burjess, Burjess is our Chief of Education Sector Group for ADB. He provides technical leadership to the Education Sector Group in ADB, leads the preparation of the EDSG work plan, and facilitates collaboration across sector and thematic groups in ADB and with external partners. So the floor is yours, Burjess.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar on tech inclusive education. Colleagues from the Tony Blair Institute will share the proposed framework on a minimum viable education system that they have developed. This is a very timely topic since the protracted pandemic has exacerbated the pre-existing learning crisis to the point that the global education community have joined hands to support urgent measures to build back better. A good example is the white paper entitled Averting an Education Catastrophe for the World's Children, prepared by the Save Our Future campaign in 2020. Since then, more efforts are underway. However, experience shows that the learning crisis has been slow to improve despite global efforts. There have been many insights on why this has been the case and how this can be addressed. For example, one thinking is that what works in expanding access and enrollment will not work in improving learning outcomes, because while quantity is largely related to hardware aspects, more schools closer to communities, more teachers, more textbooks, and more of everything, quality is largely related to human behavior and the mindset, such as how effective are the teachers, how ready are the learners, and how conducive is the learning environment at home. I view the TBI framework as a thought-provoking approach to simplify the thinking and approach while prioritizing the most critical areas in a holistic way. Let me also refer to another effort by Aaron Hamilton and John Hattie, who are publishing a book on the Lean Education Manifesto, a synthesis of 900 plus systematic reviews for visible learning in developing countries. The main thesis of the book is to use a practical implementation framework to turn evidence into action and impact at scale. They reinforce what we already know or not know well, such as teachers make the biggest difference, systems and structures help, but only to a certain point. Proper accountability is important to remove perverse incentives. It's all about effective instructional practices in classrooms and tapping on the potential of education technology, which is growing. At ADB, we have also developed a 5-pillar EdTech enabled learning framework, which Jeffrey will elaborate. What is important to ensure are 3 interrelated aspects: having a simpler approaches that are directly linked to improving teaching and learning, for example, high quality pedagogical practices, improving governance so that the key stakeholders have much greater control over improvements and decision making within a practical framework and approach, and building evidence on what works and what does not to avoid overloading the system with non-essential aspects. But in doing this, we believe that it is important to take a 2-pronged approach, going back to the basics and taking a transformational approach. To achieve this, we really have to invest in the education workforce, conducive and enabling policies, and evidence-driven approach with good data. So we look forward to having good discussions. Thank you very much. Back to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Blair. Thanks for the remarks. And yeah, there's a lot of collaboration, areas that we can work on both sides. Next, we'll have Kirsty Ennis. Let me give a quick introduction of Kirsty. She's the head of the digital government unit with TBI for global change. Kirsty focuses on digital government and the wider internet era of infrastructure. She has previously held a range of roles working on economic international policy in central government, including head of markets at HM Charity and head of economic and social team at the British Embassy in Paris. The floor is yours, Kirsty.
Thank you very much. I won't dive too far into the detail of our policy thinking because I'll let the experts do that for us, but just a couple of words on context for any participants that are not very familiar yet with the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. We're an independent not-for-profit policy organisation, and we have a range of teams from those like ours, the Tech and Public Policy team, which is looking to provide thought leadership and connect up the change makers who are driving the evolution of new technologies with the policymakers and the decision makers who need to decide how to use those to benefit the public good and how to mitigate the risks of those. And we also have teams who are directly housed within host governments to help them design and deliver policy programs. And we run programs ourselves, such as our Generation Global that you'll hear, work that you'll hear more about in a moment. But I think just the key thing is that we see the technological revolution as the key challenge facing leaders and decision makers. And that's why we've invested in developing a substantial team that's trying to look into these issues in a bit of detail and provide policy solutions that are radical and also actionable that that leaders can take away straight away and apply to their own contexts. So that's the kind of background for what we're trying to achieve and what this whole education project that Alexander has been leading for us for the past 6 months has been aiming to do. Just delighted to be with you all today and looking forward to hearing more about ADB's work and test some solutions together and see how we can collaborate further.
Thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, thanks for the quick introduction. But I think next we'll have the main presentation from TBI to have the introduction on MVES, the Minimum Viable Education System, as a framework for our discussion. This is by Alex. A quick intro for Alex. And he's the policy lead for digital government unit with TBI. And Alex's work focuses on how governments can use technology to transform public services, with a particular interest in education policy. Before joining the TBI, he held policy research and stakeholder engagement with an education technology venture capital firm. The background includes roles in public sector and innovation consulting, product management, and journalism. So as well as a Dr. Philly in history of science. So the floor is yours, Alex.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Brajesh and Kirsty, for those introductions. Really excited to be here and really looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to give a brief presentation. I'll genuinely try to keep it brief because we're not here to talk about ourselves. We're here to learn from each other and primarily from you. But bear with me. Hopefully, everyone should be able to see the presentation now. As Kirsty mentioned, this is a project that has been in the works for at least 6 months now, and we're planning to publish our first report later in November. And just to give you a very brief summary of how we approached this, we began with a focus on the importance of schools as institutions to education, which not everyone who's a proponent of technology in education follows as an approach. And in particular, we focused on the level of education systems, because we've seen time and time again, excellent schools doing amazing things with technology, but finding it really, really difficult to scale this beyond those few pockets of good practice. So what we wanted to achieve was a way to ensure that the system as a whole can benefit from what technology brings to the table. In the course of developing this report and the framework that I'll be talking about today, we spoke to dozens of stakeholders through interviews and roundtables, and you can see a selection of some of those organizations that provided input to the framework at the bottom, although, as you might see from a little note at the end of the slides, this does not imply their endorsement, but they have provided input, and their feedback has been reflected in our thinking. It's a genuine pleasure to talk to an audience that really understands the education crisis, and I'm very happy that I don't have to spend 5 or 10 minutes telling you about all the difficult challenges that education faces around the world. But our thinking around the education crisis is organized in the terms of this trilemma. There are 3 key policy goals that need to be achieved for education to succeed at scale. We need to deliver high quality education, we need to do it at a national scale, and we need to do it at a sustainable cost to public finance. And unfortunately, the school systems as they currently exist, their current design, is not equal to resolving this tension. We think technology holds a key to breaking through this trilemma, but in order to do so, a step change in our attitude to technology is required. This is how we situate the challenges of the education crisis within this framework. So the crisis is only going to deepen over the next decade as demographic pressures mean that meeting the Sustainable Development Goals requires adding at least 320 million secondary school places a year, and doing so in a way that addresses the enormous levels of learning poverty, both in low-income countries, but also globally, and the inequities in the quality of education in developed countries as well. So our report and our approach takes a global lens to this problem. We don't think this is just a global south or developing world problem. This is a worldwide issue. And then in terms of sustainable cost, our research suggests that past about 5,000 to 7,000 in constant PPP in spending per student per year, there are very marginal gains to education quality, as measured by the World Bank's learning adjusted years of schooling. But 2/3 of countries spend significantly less than that, and 20% spend more. So the spending on education is both unequal and inefficient. So what do we mean when we talk about tech-inclusive education policy as a potential solution to this problem? The debate around technology and education tends to be focused on these 2 opposite poles of being tech-driven, where the focus is on the technologies that are coming down the pipeline, the exciting things, VR, AR, machine learning, and so on. And going as far as saying that technology can replace teachers or relegate them to a supporting role. Obviously, as I can see there's a message in the chat about audio quality. Is everyone else having a similar issue? Okay, hopefully, Paul, it gets better for you. So the tech-driven approach, I think we've seen over the past decade and more, is quite poor in terms of outcomes, primarily because it is divorced from the complexities of education, ignores what actually happens on the ground and the key role that schools and educators play in this process, and it ends up putting the horse before the cart, as one stakeholder has put it, by prioritizing technology over what really matters, which is education. A more promising potential approach is what we're calling tech-assisted education. where we take available technologies and apply them to existing pedagogical practices, best pedagogical practices. And this is where we have seen some really great successes. But the problem, as I've mentioned before, is that because these technological approaches are designed to operate within the constraints of the school system as it exists today, the impact that they have is subject to all the same logistical constraints and subject to the same education crisis trilemma, the difficulties of balancing cost, quality, and scale. And as a result, those particular approaches tend to be very limited in the impact that they have. So what we're arguing for is a tech-inclusive approach, where technology is no longer seen as something that is external to the education process. Pedagogical practices need to be informed by a deep understanding of the context within which they are carried out and the purposes towards which they're directed. And if we start from context and purpose, and that includes those challenges of quality, scale, and cost, then we should be able to understand what are the best uses of technology within the broader pedagogical package, if you will, that allow us to address those challenges. And education policy as a whole needs to take this much broader lens. But scaling this tech-inclusive education requires strategic investment across a whole range of dimensions, all of them targeted at the right level. So in thinking about this, we looked to the lessons from the world of software development. There's a concept known as the minimum viable product. And here on the left-hand side, we can see sort of the traditional approach to developing a new product with limited resources, where companies try to cover a whole breadth of functionality because they feel that they need to address every single need that comes to mind when they speak to customers. But in doing so, they ignore the other dimensions of a successful software project. That the product doesn't need to be just functional, but it needs to be reliable, it needs to be usable, and it needs to resonate with its users. So this approach of doing less, but across a wider range of dimensions, struck us as something that education systems can learn from. Because what I've seen in my own work, and what I'm sure colleagues have seen in theirs, is that when we talk about technology in particular in education, there's a tendency to overinvest in one thing over everything else. For example, this might be investing in a single device for every child without thinking about whether the teachers are equipped to pedagogically engage with those new technologies. So our approach, which we were calling the minimum viable education system, has identified the requirements for scaling tech-inclusive education across a whole range of those dimensions. And as Jeffrey mentioned in his introduction, those are the ones that we believe contribute to a positive learning environment, but also make it possible to introduce technology at scale and quality and sustainable cost. So those dimensions for us, and we are very happy to share the slides if anyone doesn't have them, and I'll talk through those dimensions in a bit more detail in the rest of the presentation. But at a high level, we're looking at categories of the MISO level system support, the infrastructure, the teachers, the learners, and the parents and carers. We see this as something that can be used both as a benchmark for countries to understand where are their education systems in relation to the framework that we're proposing, but also as a strategic guide, because we know that even the first tier, and I'll talk about this in a second, is quite a significant leap for many countries in the world. So they can use this as a way to understand how do they target investment at the right level, just as we want to teach at the right level, and what are the things that they should be investing in initially, and what are the things that can maybe wait until later. And because we wanted to take this global approach, we've organized the framework in those 3 tiers. Each tier builds on the previous one. And the way that we see this is that the focus for the first one is on getting the basics right. And then as the systems develop, we're focusing on introducing more continuous improvement of teacher workforce quality, and then a system that is self-improving at and it plays a important role in the wider community and the wider context. Tier 1 is where we think most low and low middle income countries should aspire towards over the next 5 to 10 years. Many of the upper middle income countries will already be at tier 1, and so they might set their sights on tier 2 And then tier 3 is our challenge to education systems around the world, and something that we don't think exists at a system level anywhere in the world just yet. So what are those particular categories? We're looking at resource allocation, accountability, and decision-making coordination at the MISO level system, where the evolution is from systems of accountability and clearly mapped expectations for different actors within the system, and the focus on securing minimum standards, progressing towards greater and greater autonomy within the system, and identification of good practices, circulation that around the system as a whole, and the focus that shifts from direct instruction, if you will, to schools, to letting them make the best decisions for their own contexts and purposes, and trusting them to do that well. In terms of infrastructure, and this is one that I know is quite contentious and one that we've argued quite a lot ourselves within the team, we do believe that for tech inclusive education to be introduced at scale, meaningful access, which we define as 4G or broadband equivalent, needs to be present in at least 80%, but ideally every school in the country. And this does represent a significant investment, but the Institute is on the record as arguing for universal internet access as a key component in helping the development of the world. And once we do have meaningful access to the internet, we need to be aware of the challenges that multiple devices online introduce to connectivity. But in terms of, again, device access, we think we can start out with an electronic whiteboard or a projector that is connected to the internet that can stream content in the classroom, and then progress to greater access to devices for children within the classroom. In terms of teachers, none of this will strike anyone as a particular surprise, but again, we think that a stepped approach is useful here, where initial teacher training doesn't need to go all the way to very complicated digital pedagogy principles for every teacher. We need to get the foundations in place. That does include digital skills, does include classroom management, and we believe that includes a significant in-service component. And some of the scenarios that we work through in our report do suggest that we can introduce quite significant reforms to teaching careers if we have a tech-inclusive system in place. For learners, you will see the same progression from a focus on fundamentals and teaching on the right level, accessibility and inclusivity, which are non-negotiable and need to be put in place as a guiding principle from the very beginning. But again, a tier 1 effective use of direct instruction is likely to have a greater impact as capability within the system is being built up. Use of formative assessment and use of question banks to support that, and they focus on metacognition and self-regulation and digital fluency skills as an initial foundation. As systems develop, we can look to using technology to provide teachers with greater insight into the individual strengths and weaknesses of students, into recording of non-academic skills, and building on careers education and focusing more and more on higher order skills such as collaboration, communication, and teamwork. And we've seen multilateral donors, for example, come into countries and provide funding for careers education where those foundations are not in place. And that ends up being, frankly, something of a waste of resource, because we're trying to do things that children are not prepared to take on board because we haven't got the foundations right. And then finally, and this has been referred to already, there's a key role for parents and carers, where at the very least, we need to establish systems of regular communication of student progress and support parents' participation in home learning, and then progress to greater input into school management. And eventually schools can play this much greater role in the community by providing remedial learning as well. So that is a very quick whistle-stop tour of the framework to set the stage for our conversation. For us, there's a lot of overlap between our thinking and what we've heard from colleagues at ADB. We've heard and look forward to hearing more about the digital maturity framework, and we think there's a lot of potential for hopefully mutual enrichment, but certainly a lot for us to learn from your experiences here. We think there's a shared ecosystem approach between how we've approached the minimum viable education system and ADB's ecosystem lens of 5 pillars, 3 R's and 3 E's. And finally, we hope to explore whether our framework and other recommendations in our report, which I've not covered for want of time, might be helpful in informing some of the technical assistance work that ADB is carrying out in education. Thank you, everyone, very much. And back to you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Yes, I think it's very much aligned with our thinking around the ecosystem approach for technology transformation. And I think the position of technology, like you well, put it, not extreme, technology is the, technology centric, which is basically technology is the silver bullet that's gonna go around and solve everything, or it's not just a simply supporting tool that you can use. I think it's the word to put it, technology inclusion, which is basically it has to converge with the rest of the education sector system, part of the ecosystem to really make a sustainable impact and to solve the, I think what you describe as the trilemma, the impossible triangle trilemma. So I think follow on this, we're going to have the discussion. We have several discussions from ADB as well as TBI to comment on the work that they are doing related to the framework that is being introduced. And we will first go to Xin Long, who is our senior social sector specialist in ADB. She's currently handling projects in the education and social protection sector for the DMCs, mostly in Central and West Asia. Xin Long, can you come in, Xin?
Thank you very much. Good day. First, thanks for our Chief of Education Sector Group, Mr. Brajesh, and also our focal person, Mr. Xu Jian, to invite me for this session. And also thanks for TBI to share your vision, your approach to us. So I will quickly go through, what ADB has been doing on the incorporating technology in education in our operations. So I'm working on right now in the Central and West Asia department, so covering the Central and West Asian country plus also Pakistan and Afghanistan. So there are several, domains that so far the projects and even the technical assistance, have, been involved, like in terms of incorporating the education technology. So firstly, as also Alexander shared about the framework of the TBI. So ADB's right now, the operational modality, also, somehow, and more or less, complies, with that. So for example, like we are mostly focusing on the skills development through the TVET, as well as the general education, mostly on the secondary education part. So we deem that there shall be a continuity, of enhancing the students' learning, in technology, not only at their adolescent stage, but also from when they are in the general education. So for example, now we are preparing a project in Uzbekistan about the STEM in the secondary education. So there will be, like incorporation of the, say digital, let's say, for example, digital, like technology in the various, like subjects, from at least the lower secondary and up. As well as, in other aspects in the science and technology and math. So you will see that it's an approach, not subject-based, but really, interacting with each other. So from the content side, this will help update the teacher and learning material. as well as, through other aspects such as, the hard facilities, softer facilities, like teacher development. And teacher development would involve not only the in-service, but also pre-service. There will be a collaboration with higher education institutions, such as the teacher university, with the selected cohorts, like to pilot such, bringing up, qualified graduates from the teacher universities, who can really fit into, this channel. Of course, there are, on the hard facility side, of course, these ICT labs and science and technology labs will be there, providing also tablets or other, easily accessible, facilities by teachers and the students. Distance learning is also an intrinsic part, of most of our education projects, including the e-learning approach, such as e-learning platform. But we have a focus also to fit well into the local context. For example, in some countries, really at the rural area, it's hard, there is really a significant, e-divide. So how to benefit those, population with the inclusive approach, is our focus. On the governance side, we emphasize on the monitoring capacity and report capacity by strengthening their EMIS, for example. So we can say this is not only used in supply side education project, but also demand side. So demand side, we are right now preparing, but soon will be submitted for ADB board approval, the social protection program in Pakistan, in which we support the integrated MIS. So that will really enable the country to, actively monitor those children enrolled in a primary education to see how they really survive and until the completion. To give a very clear indicator to the government that the out of school children's stock and flow. I will stop soon just to say in the TVET, we have an ongoing project. We have several ongoing projects, and where we really have focus on, technology trade. I mean, in terms of the training in the different trades that are related to technology, including ICT. And also right now we have together with the SDCC, under Mr. Brajesh, this industry 4.0, study, how to incorporate the most updated technology in skills development. I just stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sim, for the really very comprehensive introduction. I think we are running a bit behind of time, so if I could remind the following discussants to limit your sharing to within 2 minutes, because we got a good number sharing, because we want to share across from different regions as well as from ADB and the TBI to get some different perspectives. So following, I will introduce Songhua Lee, who is Principal Social Sector Specialist in our South Asia region. And she's responsible for education, skills development, and social protection operations in India and Bangladesh, including policy dialogues, project formulation, and knowledge work. So the floor is yours, Songhua, to try to be concise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to TBI for those excellent presentations and how you really see the technology applications. As Jeffrey mentioned, the South Asia covers India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. And given that India, we are actually just at the last mile for the first education sector loan to support the Ministry of Education in India, which will really aim at improving the quality education at 5 selected states. The India is such a big country, and our program will focus on 5 selected states. And then let me just tell you briefly, what we are trying to do. I mean, the technology is a very much an application tool in India education, and then the government is very much emphasizing improving the quality of education, especially learning outcomes. And we are actually setting the technology applications to run through the some of the core elements of the system strengthening, for quality education. And these 4 areas. First, of course, as you know, the infrastructure, school infrastructure, digital infrastructure is important. And the second is really the classroom practices, the learning and the assessment, how we can use the technology for improving these classroom practices. And the third is the teacher and the principal capacity development. And a lot of blended learning training tools are being used for that. And the fourth is the system management, school performance and the system management through the MIS. So the MIS is really being expanded and the mainstream. And in our experience of working with the state governments, all these 4 elements have to be aligned and they have to be in sync. Otherwise, having an infrastructure without the teachers' capability of using the digital contents or using the right tool in the classroom, the technology doesn't play a very effective role. And I think many people know that. So we are very much emphasizing this system strengthening, and each of the technology application has the right training and the right materials and the right infrastructure. And in a way, the government is also seeing technology as a tool. And the utmost objective is really to transform the classroom practices. Now more into the student-centered learning or individualized learning approach where, with or without technology, improving the learning outcome is a priority. And of course, technology can play an important role with all the right elements being strengthened together. And that's what we are also trying to address in our the brand new lending program to India. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Songhua. Yeah, I think the other, one of the big operational department we have is the Southeast Asia, aside from Sinlong from the Central West Asia and Songhua from the South Asia. So we'll have Samir to share also quickly on the progress in Southeast Asia. We actually have a 4-country pilot project, EdTech project going on that we are collaborating very closely. So a quick introduction for Samir. Samir is the technology and innovation specialist with Southeast Asia. He's an economist who leads ADB's project and programs in the areas of education, skills development, social protection, and jobs in the Southeast department. So Samir, the floor is yours for maybe concise with 2 minutes. Thank you, Samir.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I think I was about to say that it's great going after Sunhwa because everything Sunhwa said, I completely agree. So that's exactly the approach we have also in Southeast Asia, the system strengthening. I think that sums up very nicely our approach, and it's great to hear the tech inclusivity. I think I'm going to really hammer that when we speak to our clients as well. It sounds great, and that's exactly our approach as well. Just to give you a quick 30 seconds, the one work we are doing, and Jeffrey is keenly aware of this, we have a technical assistance on EdTech, basically to look at what works in using technology in education. And that's something that we're doing at Diagnostics. It's a TA in 4 countries, Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. We'll put together a knowledge product based on that. That's one. The second one is we are piloting different interventions in different countries, in these 4 countries. We're doing an impact evaluation of those pilots, to see if they have an impact on learning outcomes. As Sunwa rightly said, at the end of the day, the main objective is to improve learning outcomes, and that's what we want to see. The one piece just to share with you is that we focus a lot on enhancing teachers' capacity as well. So one big program that's going to the ADB board next week, actually, it's a program loan on human capital development. And as part of that program, we have something called teacher training program in Indonesia. It's called Guru Penegrak, and we have been supporting that precisely in this space as well. I will leave it at this, Jeffrey, I think, just to sum up what we are doing in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir. So I think we hear quite a bit of project and sharings from the ADB side. So we'll turn over now. It's probably a good time to turn over to the TBI side to share on some of the experience you have with interacting with the different governments that with the digital government unit. So I will first introduce Lorenzo Reffu, who is the digital and monitoring. Who is actually the digital monitoring for evaluation and learning lead, specializing in leading the development of large-scale digital learning platforms and in monitoring and evaluating the impact of educational activities designed for young people. The floor is yours, Lorenzo.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'll try and be very brief. So yeah, I work for the Tony Blair Institute, but in particular, I work for a project called Generation Global, which is a global citizenship education program within the Tony Blair Institute. So I will speak very briefly about the program, what we've learned introducing digital tools in schools that we work with, and how the framework relates to our experience with educators, students, and policymakers. So at Generation Global, we work with students ages 13 to 17, and we equip them with the necessary competencies to become active and open-minded global citizens. We rely heavily on technologies and digital tools for our pedagogy, and the presentation resonated a lot with some of the things that we have discovered in the 10 plus years that the program has been active, and we worked in more than 30 countries. More recently, we've developed an EdTech platform called the Ultimate Dialogue Adventure. And what we've learned is that it's really important to use and consider the technology in a complementary way to support the existing educational environment and the cultural context of learners. And also what we've seen from our work with some ministries of education, for example, in Italy, in Jordan, and some states in India, is that to introduce technologies effectively, it's really critical to provide a clear framework for support. This can vary from country to country, but it's really important that teachers feel supported and really accompanied in the adoption of new technologies. And ideally, they also need to know what effect and impact using these technology will have on their students. Another thing that would resonate really well with educators and policymakers that we work with from this minimum viable education system is the proposal of the learner ID. So something that accompanies students throughout their education journey, including analytics that can be used to personalize teaching, support resource allocation, and inform the development of technological tools. So in Generation Global, we have embedded data collection tools in different activities in the program. And we're using these to adapt and improve our offer, but we also provide some of these aggregate data to some of our partners. So large school networks in India and Mexico. And in general, I think that COVID showed that the need to use technologies emerged quite robustly, and teachers experimented with many digital tools that they wouldn't have used otherwise. So to me, that shows that a minimum viable approach could work really well, rather than thinking about the digital strategies that tries to cover all aspects of the education experience. An iterative approach allows to test things and see what works and what doesn't. Thanks. I'll stop here.
Okay, thanks, Lorenzo. Yeah. Next we'll have MVES, who is the educational advisor in the Sierra Leone advisory practice. He has been supporting the government of Sierra Leone to harness the power of technology and data to achieve their priorities. So the floor is yours, MVES. you there? Okay, so if not, we will actually then introduce Camilla, who is the strategic advisor and the human capital in the Rwanda advisory practice. Camilla is the development economist focusing on skills development, basic education, and private sector development in sub-Saharan Africa. So the floor is yours, Camilla.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Yes, I'll be brief. Yes, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Camilla Kukatz, and I've been with TBI for around 3 years, all the time within the government of Rwanda. So in the past 2 years, I was working actually on skills development, so I could identify with a lot of the things that were said earlier on the importance of TVET. But since 1 year, I'm based within the Ministry of Education and working across the sector on improving the human capital index. Basically, I'm sure you all know the World Bank Human Capital Project, and the government has had a strong emphasis on using the index as a way to push key education priorities. So the index includes both health, survival, and education components. So I'm leading a cross-ministerial team that particularly focuses on the education components. And as part of this work, I see a very strong role for frameworks like the minimum viable education system that we were presented with today. But in our case, we've also been using the HCI actually as a way of improving the planning process, because in the realities, very often governments are overtaken by, you know, the kind of ad hoc demands that come in, which may divert them from the strategic priorities that were set. So we are currently doing a kind of mapping on integrating these bigger strategies as part of the planning processes. And definitely I would see the framework could play a similar role. In addition, I would say in particular for countries in sub-Saharan Africa where I'm working, there would need to be a bit more elaboration on how countries can reach to tier 1, because many of the countries are not there yet, especially if we look, for example, at infrastructure. What is outlined in the framework starts from digital infrastructure, but currently what we are looking at in Rwanda is building classrooms to reduce overcrowding and reduce distances to schools. So we also need to provide a way for countries that are not yet at tier 1 on how they can reach there. And then I think it can, in addition to that, could be a useful tool to also evaluate some of the strategies that are in place at national level. In Rwanda, we have quite a sophisticated national vision, national transformation strategy, and education sector strategy. So using the framework to really understand what is already covered within these strategies, and will these strategies help the country to reach to tier 1, I think that could also be an interesting application of the model. So let me stop here. I'm aware of the time, and thank you very much.
I think we have some time for some additional questions from the participants, and you can drop your questions in the Q&A. Before, if we have more time, I will have Yukan and Mikan to share their perspective as well. Maybe first, I think there's a question from Paul. Paul, why don't you just maybe speak up, and then we can see how we can address your question? Paul, are you there?
Yes, thanks, Jeffrey. I think it's kind of been, you know, addressed. I mean, it's a very interesting framework, this minimum viable education system framework, and sorry, let me put my video on. So I did just sort of, it looks good. There's a lot of different elements to get an education system right, and that's part of that framework. And so I was just asking Alexander, you know, is this the idea that, you know, ADB might adopt this framework when it designs projects to make sure that we're covering all the elements and we're at the right, we understand at the right tier. So that was, I just, from a practical point of view, I was thinking about, you know, how does ADB benefit from TBI's work? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. So if I may, quickly add on top of what Paul said is, I think it's important that, you know, for ADB projects, that the thought process is really making technology inclusive. It's really taking the ecosystem approach for technology interventions. And also at the same time, we have to realize, I think right now we're working with the EIU on the what we call the digital education readiness framework, which is very aligned in like Alex said, with the MVES framework that the TBI is sharing today. I think those are the approach in itself is important. And then when we work with the different pipeline project like Cambodia, the secondary project, Uzbekistan, there's a project coming. So it's important to start to applying the concept and the framework so that we really take the ecosystem approach for technology transformation projects, with our future pipeline project. So Alex, you want to add on this?
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Paul, for the question. I mean, as I said in the chat, I think our ambition, we're not doing this just to put out some good ideas in the world. Our ambition is for our policy thinking to be applied in practice in as many places as possible. We're not so arrogant as to think, we probably got it right on the first try. And this is, exactly how everyone should work in education and technology from now on. So we think that the way this kind of framework gets better is through application, through shared thinking and exchange of ideas. If colleagues in ADB end up talking about this approach to their government counterparts, and Samir, I was very happy to hear that you plan to do that from now on. Would love to hear what they think about it and whether this resonates, which parts don't necessarily come across as well. We just as the education sector needs to keep iterating and needs to continue to improve and to identify best practices. The same, I think, is true of the policy thinking on this. So if you see use in this framework, please do use it. And I hope we can continue to exchange views and knowledge and improve our respective practices.
Thanks, Alex. Maybe because I maybe introduce Yuka, if you can come in, because Yuka is supporting as the domain expert for the school education, the K-12 sector, and supporting a number of school education projects like the one in Cambodia, Uzbekistan, and a few others. Yuka is actually the STEM expert as well. So maybe Yuka, you can share some of the thinking on how we can apply a framework like this in some of the ADB projects, along with our country assessment and a study that we have done in the 4 countries and the digital education readiness framework. Yuka, you want to come in?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeffrey. Actually, now you made me confused because I was prepared with my own comments, but now you made me a question. But I'm trying to answer from that point of view as well. First of all, thank you for interesting presentation, and it would be actually really interesting to hear a bit more about the details as well. What is your thinking like behind this? I actually have one kind of main point, being previously a curriculum specialist. So I'm always bringing up the curriculum perspective that you didn't actually mention in the presentation at all, because I think why we are educating our young people is of course that they should learn something, and the curriculum is kind of there to tell us that what should the young people learn, and then the EdTech is there to support the process of learning and teaching. So like the ultimate goal, of course, is to get the foundational skills and after that to learn more. So my question actually originally was that is the curriculum somehow part of your framework, and like how is it included there? Because it comes, of course, all to that same question that how the education technology or technology is included in the curriculum, because it should not just exist, as you also mentioned yourself, but that it just exists there, but it should exist to enhance the learning process. And I think this is something that also has come up with our STEM and EdTech studies in the 4 countries, that to enhance the learning process, the education technology, of course, has to support the delivery of curriculum and like as the main point. The other thing, I'm also having a TA about teacher quality, and I think this is also very interesting from that point of view, that how can we also make the teacher pre-service and in-service education really tech inclusive, because of course the teachers are then the key persons also to deliver this EdTech into their teaching and the students' learning. But yeah, that's maybe shortly from my side. Just as a comment, I don't know if we have time for you to answer, but we can continue the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Jukka. I also saw a question from Kirsty. I think Kirsty, we can follow up as well on the digital, basically the DERF framework we talked about. The concept is very similar. Is that when we do the national assessment, we're going through also 5 pillars. But one of the key pillars we're looking at is that the MVES doesn't cover is the provider, the local or the global provider pillar that we think is also important in a given country, so that to ramp up the curriculum, the system to support, to have a local presence to really customizing those curriculum and contents, and working with some of the global providers as well. So and that's, I think, some of the differences and in focus. But I think the other pillars are very much aligned, and I think the approach we're taking is definitely the way we should recommend our DMCs to go towards when they take on educational transformation project. And well, I think in respect time, so we probably have to quickly wrap up, and we can also interact through offline emails for additional questions. And I'll give the hands to Pei-Ching for maybe talk through some of the next steps and actions that we can follow up on, beyond this session, so we can make this session really just the beginning and starting of the tour organization, sharing your practices in different regions. I think you have TBI has good experience in Africa and other regions, and we have strong presence in Asia for sure. So those are, I think there are a lot of other collaborations we can do to follow up this topic that we have today. So Pei-Ching, you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, everyone. So I have the unenviable job of trying to wrap up a very lively discussion, and I know that not everyone has had a chance to speak and to contribute. But like Jeffrey said, hopefully this is just the first of many to come. I like to think of this forum, ADB and TBI forum, as a sort of a minimum viable product for future collaborations. So I would really encourage anyone to kind of just pick up conversations with anyone else. And I probably would imagine that there are no objections to us sharing contact details, but I will coordinate that with Petit following today's event. And I just wanted to say thank you again. I've been so sort of enriched by your wealth of experience across such an expansive geographical region. And we've touched on a number of common areas of interest, objectives, as well as ways in which we could enhance and value add each other's works. We're very, very keen to kind of move policy recommendations into practice, and very keen to kind of speak with you separately. And Samir, please feel free to adopt the tech inclusive term, and Sunhua, we will definitely refer to your system strengthening. And thank you very much for this exchange.
Thank you, Pei-Ching. Kirsty or Brajesh, you want to add any final words before we close up? We're right at the 6 o'clock mark for folks who are based in the Manila time zone. Brajesh or Kirsty,
so you are basically asking me 10 seconds, time. Well, I think this is, as pointed out, this is a evolving area, very important area for us, and a lot has been shared. So let's build on this and have more discussions jointly or on the sideways, because as you have seen, different colleagues are working on different areas. But I think the question from one question is about how we are taking a common approach. Yes, the theory of change and what are the common elements that we need to look at is very important from an ecosystem approach. So we can also have further discussion on that. But anyway, thank you very much, for a very good presentation.
Okay, thank you. I think we are about to wrap up today. So again, thanks for everyone for the live discussion. And again, the discussion gonna follow, and we will follow up offline as well. So for everyone, have a very great evening, and for folks in Europe, have a good morning, and hopefully have a good lunch there as well. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye,
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.